Right, recently I did a video about scumbling techniques. And now in this video I'm going to show you that entire demonstration. It's part of the, let's say, holiday season inspiration as well. These are the colors I'm using. Gold and open acrylics are a very useful paint if you want to slow down the drying time, and they mimic oil paints to a large extent. You can keep them just nice and soft over a couple of days. So the first thing I'm doing is composing this subject, and I'm going to use it as inspiration. Particularly I like that nice big tree on the left, balancing it out with a few smaller trees or bushes on the right, extending the hill further up and making it a stronger diagonal leading to the focal area, which is basically where the tree meets the landscape or the grass there on the rule of thirds. A few nice shadows from left to right, starting off with the blocking in and just getting the big shapes in as well. Now, this big tree collection of tree and a few shrubs around it, the tree has got to be an interesting shape. And I think it's got that potential, although in the photo you may think it's just quite an indeterminate type of shape. But I think that is going to help to make it interesting, because it's all over the place with soft, broken up edges. So there's sky going to be showing through the landscape behind it, lots of sky holes, and basically a very deconstructed shape around the edges. It's not a hard-edged circle or triangle. We want to avoid that. Cool soft colors in the background. And one of the ideas here is to create an atmospheric scene. Now you may have seen in a previous lesson I did on scumbling that I used scumbling in this scene to help with the atmospherics. But in the blocking in stage, it's about making a start. So I'm going to press on through this stage fairly quickly. And we just want, like I said, the main shapes, the big shapes, and the general idea behind the colors. Here, a touch of yellow to the cerulean blue, because the sky will be a little warmer closer to the horizon, getting cooler as it goes up. I'm not trying to follow the reference slavishly, so I'm changing the shape of the clouds a little as well. But as I say, paintings like this are all about the light, and I try to describe that with as attractive colors as I can produce, aiming for clean, strong and vibrant color, a good sense of atmosphere. So you can see those distant greens have become more of a yellow ochre blue, warming up as they get closer and ultimately becoming really strong and warm right in the foreground. This helps your landscape to head off into the distance and not look like your landscape's going up into the sky, but rather receding off to the horizon. This creates depth and what we call atmospheric perspective. I really do like breaking up the dark shapes with a few blobs of light color, as I've done there on the left. This is the beauty of having a strong dark shape to dominate the scene, or to become the fulcrum on which the light can play. bringing in some of the deep yellow and a variety of greens in the foreground. Shadow greens just have to be darker and cooler than the lights. The light greens in the foreground are going to be more yellow because I want them warm and rising up to us, and therefore creating a nice strong level landscape. My shadows have various color temperature shifts in them, and there could be a little bit of cool red, like the quinacridone coming in there. Even suggestions of a dark purple. And that way your shadows aren't just black holes in your canvas, but become cool and interesting shadows with suggestions of colors that you can just make out. When you peer into those shadows, you want to see things or suggested shapes, and little color temperature shifts do that. The shadows I'm putting in at the moment are, as I said, still part of the block-in stage, so they're quite dark, and I will modulate those and lighten them up and make them more colorful as we go. The photo will exaggerate those dark shadows across the foreground as the photo tends to average things out, so your shadows may look a bit darker, but in reality it's more like a cool shadowy green as opposed to a almost black shape. But start in this fashion with your blocking in, and you can work from a beginning point with thin color and then add thicker color as you go. And you can see already I'm putting a little bit of textured variety in the foreground with slight color temperature shifts, whether it's lemon yellow or deep yellow, a little touch of white. And we're already getting a bit of interest. So that is the block-in pretty much nearly done, just suggesting a few of the shrubs and trees, and there's going to be a farmhouse back there, I've decided, and maybe a few in the distance. A red roof. So looking quite atmospheric already and nicely blocked in. So this is later, in fact the following day, and my paints are still nice and soft. What I do is I just spritz them with a water atomizer and leave them, and as long as I get into it the next day, there I'm just cleaning my brush off with a tissue, because I'd use very little water when I'm painting with acrylics. I'd rather change a brush than get lots of water on my brush accidentally and then dilute my paint. So wipe the brush off, and here bringing in some modulations to the clouds, very soft highlights and a little bit of shadow with a touch of a violet color perhaps. And that's sort of a naturalistic looking sky, but not too dominating either. And just feather the edges a little, soften them up, and keep working on the clouds until you're happy, but don't make them hard edged. That's the main thing, or too dominating in dark colors. Keep them soft. Here I'm starting to scumble the edges of the distant hillside, merge it with the sky just a little more to increase the atmospherics, and just dragging that wet paint over the mostly dry acrylic. and trying to just remind myself to have the light, warmer color on the left as it's hit by the sun coming from left to right, and then cooler shadows heading off to the right. Here, creating a sort of a grayish green. Might be just a touch too grey, but I want that good sense of distance, that hillside looking a bit more like a mountain, but that's not too bad either. I'm quite happy with that. And those light clouds and light above seem to soften the top edges of the mountain, giving it a very natural look. A couple of greyish lights back there, they stand out just because of the value contrast, suggesting distant farmstead, bringing a little bit more warmth in the landscape around it, which will also help to reveal our little farmhouse closer in. Yellow ochre is a nice coolish green, if I could call it that. It suggests distant feels and has a very atmospheric look by comparison to the warm lights in our foreground and even the middle ground. And like I said in the beginning, use your reference for guidance, especially for potential interesting shapes. The tree, the building, perhaps from the distance brought that forward a little. But you don't have to follow it slavishly. For instance, using the ochre and yellow colors when the photo suggests a very green landscape. Notice the bushes and sort of fence line I'm putting in, using a bush and the grass behind it. Here, scumbling in a very sort of traditional sense, letting the textures of the color show through. A washed out red with some highlights, and notice the sort of shadowy side of the building is a cool color. We'll just fix up those shapes there so we're getting a touch of light on the roof, and just cleaning it up on the edges there so the house does stand away, but it must look like part of the landscape and not like a cathedral dominating the space. It must look atmospheric, so you won't put a bright red roof on it, you'll have this sort of atmospheric pinkish color instead. Once again, using scumbling in this middle ground to bring it forward, just breaking up a few edges as well, a very sort of natural feel to those distant shrubs and bushes, kind of a hedgerow effect. So I think that distant area into the middle ground is looking nicely resolved, and now I want to work on the tree. I do like the shapes of the sort of erratic branches, and it takes actually a lot of discipline to keep that in place. So I'm starting off with just softening up the edges with some green color, warmed up greens, trying to get a sense of volume to this tree as well, so it's not just a flat shape anymore, but is now modulated with light to middle value to dark values on the right hand side, little dots and dashes against the sky to suggest leaves and things hanging over. And we'll carry on in this fashion until we're happy. It's very common to go too far with the stage and lose a lot of that shape. And then you have to come back and carve in with some background color. But it's a to and fro sort of thing. Can't be really helped. Touches of burnt sienna to suggest some branches, but also adding a sort of that reddish contrast with the greens. Burnt sienna being a sort of a dark greenish, dark reddish color, what am I saying? So that dark reddish color sets off the greenery, and we're getting a little bit of interest now. Maybe a tree trunk, maybe more branches. Just a whole mess of shapes, giving this a very sort of brambly look, which I do like. So in the darker recesses of the tree shape on the right hand side, you don't want to bring in too many lights either. Maybe some mid-value greens, but it's got to ultimately remain a shadow side to the tree. So now I'm really looking at a combination of lights, shadows, edges, where edges need to be softened. I don't want too much attention on the extreme right-hand side. It's more of a balancing act. The focal area is, of course, tree heading to the house. A few more sky holes, bringing some of those nice blues and violets of the mountain through there, which is, I think, very appealing color. Also time to assess and decide how much more needs to be added, if anything, to those distant colors. Right, so we're now heading to the foreground, and as I think about those steps, I've got to just basically decide also how I'm going to paint this foreground shadow. But let's do a little bit of some lights as well. That's a little bit of yellow ochre, some of that cool yellow, and I want a bit more light back there, so scumbling again. And of course, because acrylics dry pretty quick, you can get away with that. And a few sparks of light as well, especially around this focal area. A bit thicker paint, a little bit of impasto to help the eye. Your eye will pick those little shapes up. If there's a bit more emphasis in a particular area of a painting, your eye is going to notice it. Yeah, I love this sort of buttery scumbling in the foreground. And these sparks of light against the dark are a lot of fun to do. You have to be patient, you have to set everything up. But when I put those little spots of light against dark, it's just so much fun. Dragging the brush up to scumble it once again to get a grassy effect, softening an edge, at the same time, as well as adding a few sparks against those dark shadow colors. And once again, it also makes your grass effect look a bit more natural. Don't overdo the grassy effects with something like a fan brush and you do too much of it. Touches of blue echoing the sky color in the shadows. And as I said in the beginning, these dark foreground shadows will be softened up because there is a lot of light filtering around and bouncing around a scene like this. Light reflects off the landscape into the sky, back from the sky, down again. And your shadows out in the open like this can be a softer, cooler green. Yeah, I'm bringing more color into the longer parts, the sort of ends of the shadows here, breaking them up, because they will lighten up as they move away from the object casting the shadow. Soften the edges, lighten them up, bring a bit more color. As long as they remain dark, they will look like a shadow. Accents, dark accents also add some interest. It doesn't all have to be highlights. If you've got a light area, a few little dabs of dark can make it look more interesting and suggest things, suggest rocks, for instance, or patches of earth colors, like those touches of burnt sienna. Here, creating texture by dragging the brush in different directions, flicking it up here like this to get a bit grassy shapes, or just up, down, some diagonal shapes, and horizontals, all adding a textured surface of subtle color temperature shifts to make the light areas look visually interesting, but not too demanding of attention. Not everything has to shout. Softening this up a little more in the shadow here. I feel it's still just a bit too dark on the left as well, so I might have to just bring a little bit more of a darker green, a more colorful green. But the painting has fallen into place fairly quickly. So I'm going to bring in a few added shapes like suggested fence posts, make them very thin, and if you do make them too thick initially, you can cut in with surrounding color and make them look a little more elegant. Here, using the rigger brush to create sort of longer stalks of grass. Bit more color along the edges. Stand back, assess, have a look. Decide where you need to bring in a little touch of light, a little extra color perhaps. I've decided I like these strokes of light, so I'm going to add a few more. If they're too many, just get rid of them, but you won't know till you try. Tops of the poles, getting a little more light onto them. Getting the perfect shaped shadow sometimes is harder than you may think, and I always wonder why I don't use the color or the shape from the reference I just end up changing it so often. A couple of sparks of color against a branch or two, but much. Knock it back here or there. This fence post is demanding just a bit too much attention there, so I've cooled it down and I will cut in a bit and make it a bit smaller. It's too close to the left edge to get that much attention, so keep an eye on your edges and corners. You don't want the eye getting stuck on anything in those parts of the painting. So we're pretty much done with it, I think, and I'm going to sign it off. I think it's got the light, it's got the color, there's nice atmospherics, and I'm pleased with the result. Well, I hope you enjoyed that demo and got a few ideas and tips there. You can try it in your next video. Now we're coming up to the end of the year, and I just want to wish you a great holiday season and all the best for 2026. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. Hopefully we're going to have an even better painting year coming up, and you don't want to miss those videos as well. A quick word as well, on the 2nd of January we're releasing another edition of the Create Art magazine. Don't miss it. Get your free subscription in the description to this video and you won't miss that great publication. Check it out, the Create Art magazine. You can also visit createartmagazine.com. Check out the details there and subscribe for free. Until next time, happy painting and cheers for now.